Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull. Which of these three teams is in the best shape in pre-season testing? That's what we're going to be discussing in this video. Pre-season testing is normally quite difficult to get a read on where each of the teams sit in a so-called Formula 1 pecking order. But with having only 3 days of running for this season, it's meant the teams have had to have accelerated their normal testing plans, particularly in terms of race simulations. And with that, this has allowed us to get an understanding of the early season's form guide in terms of a Formula 1 pecking order. So the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull haven't been able to sandbag as much as they normally would and have had to have gotten on with race simulations to gather data. And so what we're going to be doing in today's video is going over each of the team's race sims, looking at what the data shows us and suggests about their tyre deg and just the general car handling that they have. And we're going to throw in quotes from each of the drivers so we get a roundup and a clearer view on where each of the top 3 teams lay. Before we do, if you're new around here, consider subscribing to the channel as I will be covering all the latest Formula 1 news as and when it drops. And when I hit 1,000 subscribers, I'll be running a competition where I'll be giving 3 of you lucky subscribers teamwear from your favourite Formula 1 teams. So be on the lookout for that once this channel hits 1,000 subs. Okay, so here is that very race data I was talking about from the top 3 teams. Notably, only Sergio Perez and the Red Bull team have managed to do a full race distance, so we have to take that into consideration. Having said all that, all 3 teams started off their race simulations on the C3 tyre and going for all of them 15 laps or more, so we've got a very good and clear understanding of how their race simulations start off in the first stint in terms of tyre deg. And what really stands out is the fact Sergio Perez has a much better tyre deg than both the Mercedes and Ferrari. In fact, his whole race simulation in terms of a first stint equates to a medium time of a 1 minute 38.5. And if we take into consideration those of Leclerc and Russell, who respectively have mediums of 1 minute 39 flat and 1 minute 40 flat. So straight away you can see that the degradation that Sergio Perez and the RB19 experiences is a considerable amount less than that of the Ferrari and Mercedes. And this is a trend that continues very much on for the entire race simulation. Yes, we can't have like for like data for all 3 teams, but we do have very similar data for Sergio Perez and George Russell. For the second stints for both of those two, they have a C2 tyre and then they finally end on a C1 tyre. And you can clearly see that the Mercedes lags behind quite a considerable amount in terms of lap time lost to that of the RB19. Whereas the RB19 can considerably stay in the 37s and 38s for literally the entirety of the second stint on the C2 tyres. Russell and the W14 have a lot harder time doing so. In fact, they really don't. They are in the 39s for the majority of their second stint on the C2, which is nearly 2 seconds or a second in some situations on certain laps, which is quite a big margin to be given away. And once again, the final stint on the C1s, Perez and the RB19 runs pretty much the entire stint in the 37s with only 5 to 6 laps in the 38s. Whereas we look at George Russell's C1 stint and you can see pretty much it's a scattergun. You've got a few in the 36s, which is quicker than anything Perez managed, but then you also have lap times in the high 37s, high 38s and mid 39s. So that particular stint, the final third stint from the W14, was a lot harder to get a read on. It seems like, they couldn't get a good working window in terms of the temperature in the C1s and just really struggled in general. Now let's compare the stint of Leclerc on his C1 with that of Perez on his C1. Note how it's the second stint for Leclerc, so he's got a lot more fuel on board still than Perez does in his third and final stint. But as you can see from the SF-23, they too have a very, very consistent base of lap times when it comes to a C1 tyre stint. He spends the majority of his laps in the 37s, very much like how Perez did. And in fact, only on 5 occasions did he drop into the 38. So this is a very good indication of good tyre deg on the C1. And in fact, really, although it's not quite as good on the C3, it's still a lot better than that of what the W14 managed in George Russell's hands. So, what does this all show us about the handling characteristics that we've all witnessed through the onboards and just seeing the cars in general around the Bahrain International Circuit? Without a shadow of a doubt, Red Bull are the most race-ready team in the entire Formula 1 paddock. Ever since the RB19 first took to the Bahrain International Circuit, the car has run like clockwork. There hasn't been any gremlins, any breakdown or stoppage in their testing plans, and it's just been the smoothest sailing testing session they've most likely had in their entire Formula 1 history as a team. From looking at the car's onboard footage to just general observations around the circuit, it has a very nice feel and touch to the RB19. You very much can just give it one input in the steering wheel and the car does exactly what both Checo and Max want, which of course brings confidence to the drivers. They're not having to second guess and think about what they're doing before, in the middle and after a corner, and it's all just kind of a natural motion. And of course, with having a car like that, this also helps tyre degradation, means you have longer tyre life, and can of course extend or shorten your stints on each of the tyres from a Grand Prix weekend, depending on where you are on the track at any given point in time, whether they're looking to do an undercut or an overcut. They know currently they can do so because they have better tyre wear management than either of the Mercedes or Ferrari. Behind the Red Bull is the Ferrari SF-23. Now what's really interesting is a few particular things they have been doing and playing around with during this pre-season test in Bahrain. They for one have run a much skinnier rear wing than they actually will be at the Bahrain Grand Prix this coming weekend, and it's one that was not optimized for the characteristics of the Bahrain International Circuit. And of course, the car itself looks like it has a nice handling to it. The drivers aren't having to put as much input as, say, the Mercedes or other cars we've seen out on track. And again, this shows up in tyre deg, although of course it's not to the level that the Red Bull looks to be having in terms of us knowing little about how much fuel all three teams actually have during each of these stints, because some rumours actually stated the Ferrari was running a true race simulation, whereas Red Bull might have been, but I can't see the point in doing so. And of course, once they put on the correct level of rear wing in terms of the downforce level, which would be a medium downforce, this should bring them additional lap time, additional balance, and these are all things that are just going to help naturally with tyre deg. And then we come to the Mercedes W14. A car vastly improved on last year, but still lagging behind the likes of the RB19 and SF-23. Yes, they have completely eradicated the porpoising phenomenon that plagued them for the entire Grand Prix season last year. So this means they're no longer having to think about ways and solutions to stop the car from bouncing and can focus in on updates to make the car quicker. Again, there's still a few traits that we're seeing out on track. It has a good turn in initially, but then it picks up mid-corner understeer, and you can just see it from the way the car kind of has a lazy turn in throughout the middle of a corner, and then it kind of grips up again, and this causes a sudden counter of oversteer with the drivers having to kind of correct that as well. So it's not a stable platform to be doing a race simulation on. And of course, with this kind of late corner snap, this is not going to play into any sort of advantage when it comes to a race distance, as of course the car's moving around unnecessarily, the tyres are going to be moving around. This is going to overheat them, cause more tyre deg, the tyres are going to go off, and so they're going to have to do more tyre preservation or an extra stint. Right guys, that is the video. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like, and any comments you may have had on what I've been speaking about, leave them down below as well. I'll catch you all in another Formula 1 video this week.